The crystal chandelier above cast fractured light across Helena's trembling hands as she stood before the mirror. 6 months had passed since that suffocating wedding day, and everything had changed.
How the woman.
Staring back at her bore little resemblance to the broken bride who had whispered hollow vows to a stranger. Her fingers traced the edge of the divorce papers hidden beneath a stack of books on her vanity. Today would be the day she reclaimed her life. The apartment felt different. In the morning light, what once seemed like a pristine prison now looked almost fragile, as if Dominic's carefully constructed world could shatter with a single wrong move. Helena had learned to read the subtle signs of his moods, the way his jaw tightened when business calls went poorly, how his gray eyes would darken when he thought no one was watching. But she had been watching. For months, she had been studying the man who had purchased her like a piece of art to complete his perfect collection. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway made her pulse quicken. Not from fear anymore, but from something far more dangerous. Anticipation. Helena. His voice carried that familiar edge of control as he appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his charcoal suit. "We have the Morrison Charity Gala tonight," she turned slowly, meeting his gaze with a confidence that made him pause. "I know, I've already chosen what to wear." Something flickered in his expression. Over the past month, she had stopped asking permission, stopped seeking his approval. The change seemed to unsettle him in ways she found oddly satisfying. Good. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne, sharp and expensive. "The Morrisons are important clients. I trust you understand the expectations. Play the perfect wife, smile, look beautiful, speak only when spoken to." Helena's voice held no bitterness, only a strange sort of amusement. "I've become quite good at it, haven't I?" Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly. There was something different about her tone, something that made the air between them feel charged. "You have, perhaps too good." She stepped past him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his chest. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them. "I'll be ready at 7. She walked away. Helena felt his gaze burning into her back. The balance of power in their arrangement was shifting, and they both knew it. What Dominic didn't know was that Helena had discovered something that changed everything. She had found his journal, hidden behind a false panel in his office. She had uncovered pages of handwriting that revealed the truth about their marriage. The debt story had been a lie. Dominic hadn't saved her family from financial ruin. He had created their problems in the first place, manipulating circumstances to force her into this arrangement. But more shocking than his deception were the entries that came after their wedding. Page after page of observations about her, detailed notes about her reactions, her strength, her defiance. And buried beneath his clinical analysis, she had found something that made her heart race with a mixture of fury and something else entirely. He was fascinated by her. The cold, calculating Dominic Marquez had been watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with their business arrangement and everything to do with a hunger he refused to acknowledge. Helena smiled as she heard his office door close. Tonight, at the Morrison Gala, she would begin to turn his own game against him. She would show him what it felt like to want something he couldn't simply buy or control. The woman who had entered this apartment as a broken bride was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, someone who had learned to play by Dominic's rules better than he did. The Morrison ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, all golden light and whispered secrets. Helena descended the grand staircase with deliberate grace, her midnight blue gown flowing like liquid silk. She had chosen it specifically for the way it made her skin glow, for how the deep neckline would catch Dominic's attention despite his best efforts to remain indifferent. She found him near the bar, surrounded by his usual circle of investors and politicians. But when he saw her approach, the conversation around him seemed to fade into background noise. "Gentlemen, my wife." The words still tasted foreign on his tongue, but Helena noticed how his gaze lingered on the curve of her collarbone. "Mrs. Marquez." Senator Morrison extended his hand with a politician's practiced smile. "Dominic is a lucky man, is he?" Helena's smile was enigmatic as she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "I think luck had very little to do with our marriage." The comment drew curious glances, and she felt Dominic's tension spike beside her. Good. She wanted him off balance. Helena has a tendency toward drama, Dominic said smoothly, but his hand found the small of her back, fingers pressing just hard enough to warn her. She leaned into the touch instead of pulling away, and felt him stiffen. I prefer honesty, too. Platitudes. Don't you find that business relationships built on truth tend to be more profitable? Senator Morrison laughed, clearly enjoying the exchange. Your wife has a point, Dominic. Perhaps we should discuss the harbor development project with such refreshing directness. As the men launched into business talk, Helena excused herself to the powder room. She needed a moment to collect herself, to process the electricity that had shot through her when Dominic touched her back. This was supposed to be about control, about turning his manipulation against him. She hadn't expected her body to betray her so completely. The powder room was empty, all marble and soft lighting. Helena stared at her reflection, trying to reconcile the composed woman in the mirror with the chaos of emotions churning inside her. The door opened behind her. She knew without turning that it was Dominic. "What are you doing?" At his voice was dangerously quiet. "Fixing my lipstick." Yeah. She met his eyes in the mirror, noting how the golden light made them look almost molten. You know what I mean? He stepped closer, and suddenly the spacious powder room felt impossibly small. That comment about honesty. You're playing with fire, Helena. She turned to face him, backing against the marble counter. Right. Maybe I like the heat. For a moment, something raw and unguarded flashed across his features. His gaze dropped to her lips, then lower, tracing the line of her throat. When he looked back up, the careful mask was in place again, but Helena had seen what lay beneath. It want. Pure, undeniable want. This is not a game, he said, his voice rough around the edges, isn't it? Helena tilted her head, studying him with new eyes. Because I've been wondering, Dominic, if this marriage is just business, why do you watch me when you think I'm not looking? Why do you clench your fists when other men speak to me? Why did you write 17 pages about the way I laughed in that journal you think I don't know about? The words hit him like physical blows. She watched the color drain from his face, followed immediately by a flush of anger and something that looked dangerously close to panic. You had no right to read that. I had every right. Helena stepped closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You bought me, remember? Manipulated my family into debt so you could swoop in and save the day? Did you really think I wouldn't find out? His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with just enough pressure to make her breath catch. You don't understand what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Tell me why a man who could have any woman he wants chose to trap one who wants nothing to do with him. For a heartbeat, she thought he might actually answer. Ah! His thumb brushed across her pulse point, and she knew he could feel how fast her heart was racing. The space between them crackled with tension, 6 months of careful distance combusting into something neither of them could control. Then the powder room door opened, and Senator Morrison's wife swept in with a bright smile. Dominic released Helena's wrist and stepped back as if he'd been burned, his mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Oh, what a lovely couple you make, Mrs. Morrison gushed. Completely oblivious to the charged atmosphere she'd interrupted, Helena smiled graciously and excused herself, leaving Dominic standing, frozen by the marble counter. As she returned to the ballroom, she could feel his eyes following her every movement. The game had begun in earnest now, and Helena intended to win. The apartment felt like a pressure cooker in the days following the Morrison Gala. Dominic had retreated deeper into his work, leaving earlier and returning later, but Helena could feel his presence even when he wasn't there. The air itself seemed to vibrate with unresolved tension. She found herself studying the spaces he occupied, looking for clues to the man behind the mask. His coffee cup left on the kitchen counter, still warm when she woke. The way he'd moved his reading chair to face the window where she liked to sit in the morning sun. Small things that suggested he was as aware of her as she was of him. Thursday evening, everything changed. Helena was in his office, not hiding anymore, but boldly researching the companies he'd used to orchestrate her family's financial collapse. When she heard his key in the lock 2 hours earlier than usual, She didn't move from his desk chair, didn't close the laptop screen showing bank records and wire transfers. When Dominic appeared in the doorway, his face was a study in controlled fury. "Find anything interesting?" His voice could have cut. "Glass. Quite a bit, actually." Helena leaned back in his chair, projecting a calm she didn't feel. "Carlyle Holdings, the shell company that bought my father's debts? Very cleverly hidden, but not quite clever enough." Dominic moved into the room with predatory grace, closing the door behind him with a soft click that felt ominous. "Been busy. I had time on my hands. It's amazing what you can discover when you're not busy being the perfect decorative wife." He stopped in front of the desk, his hands flat on the surface as he leaned toward her. This close, she could see the storm brewing in his gray eyes, could smell the rain on his jacket from the thunderstorm brewing outside. "You think you've uncovered some grand conspiracy?" he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You think you understand?" "What happened? I understand enough." Helena stood, refusing to be intimidated by his proximity. "You destroyed my family to get what you wanted. The question is why? Why me, Dominic? You could have had anyone." Lightning illuminated the windows, casting stark shadows across his face. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable, as if her question had struck something deep and painful. "'Cause you were the only one who ever said no to me." The admission hung between them like a live wire. Helena felt the ground shift beneath. Her feet, all her carefully constructed theories crumbling in the face of this raw honesty. "What?" Dominic straightened, running a hand through his dark hair. 3 years ago? The Anderson merger celebration. You were there with your college friends, working as a server to pay for your art classes. Helena's breath caught. She remembered. That night, remembered the arrogant businessman who had cornered her in the coat room, assuming she would be flattered by his attention. "You told me that all the money in the world couldn't buy class, and that I was the most emotionally bankrupt man you'd ever met." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Then you walked away. So you decided to destroy my life because I hurt your ego." "I decided to understand you because you intrigued me." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Every woman I'd ever met wanted something from me. Money, status, connections. But you looked at me like I was nothing more than a spoiled child throwing a tantrum." Thunder crashed overhead, and Helena realized she was trembling, not from fear, but from the intensity of his confession, from the way he was looking at her now as if she held something precious and dangerous. "The debt manipulation. The forced marriage," she managed. "That was your way of understanding me? It was my way of keeping you." The words seemed to tear from his throat. "I told myself it was curiosity, that once I figured out what made you different, I could walk away. But the more time I spent watching you, learning your habits, your strength, your fire." He stopped, jaw clenched, as if the words physically hurt. "The more you what?" Helena moved around the desk, closing the distance between them until she could see her reflection in his eyes. "The more I realized I was falling in love with my own wife." The confession shattered something between them. All the careful distance. All the rules and arrangements dissolved in an instant. Helena felt her anger transform into something equally fierce, but infinitely more dangerous. "You love me?" Her voice was barely audible above the storm. "I love your fire when you're angry. I love how you refuse to be diminished by anything I do. I love that you found my journal, and instead of confronting me, you used the information to gain power over me." His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then stopped inches away. "I love that you're going to leave me, and there's nothing I can do to stop you." Helena stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the cold businessman or the calculating manipulator, but a man who had built walls so high he'd forgotten how to tear them down. A man who had confused possession with love until she'd shown him the difference. "The divorce papers," she whispered. "I know about them too." His smile was heartbreaking. "I've been waiting for you to serve them." The storm outside seemed to mirror the chaos in Helena's chest. Everything she thought she knew had just been turned inside out. The man she'd planned to destroy was offering to destroy himself instead. And somehow, that changed everything. Helena's world tilted on its axis. She had armed herself for war, only to find her enemy surrendering before the battle began. The divorce papers in her room suddenly felt like weapons pointed at the wrong target. "You're not going to fight me?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Dominic's laugh held no humor. How do you fight someone who has every right to leave? How do you argue with justice? Rain lashed against the office windows as Helena studied his face, searching for the deception she'd grown accustomed to finding. Instead, she saw exhaustion, regret, and something that looked dangerously like hope. Show me, she said suddenly. Show you what? The real you. Not the businessman, not the manipulator. The man who wrote 17 pages about my laugh. Helena moved closer until they were, breathing the same air. Show me who you were before you built these walls.
Oh.
Dominic's control wavered. Helena, you don't understand what you're asking. Then help me understand. For a long moment they stood frozen in the space between revelation and retreat. Then, as if something inside him finally broke, Dominic reached past her and pulled a photograph from the bottom drawer of his desk. The image showed a young boy, maybe 8 years old, with gray eyes and a genuine smile. He was covered in mud, holding a scraggly kitten, laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. I was 7 when my mother died, Dominic said quietly. My father blamed me for it, said if I hadn't been born, she might have lived longer, been stronger. His fingers traced the edge of the photograph. By the time I was 10, I'd learned that love was a weakness people used against you. By 15, I decided never to give anyone that power again. Helena's heart clenched as she looked at the boy in the picture, trying to reconcile him with the man beside her. What happened to the kitten? My father had it put down. Said it was making me soft. Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact, but Helena caught the flicker of old pain in his eyes. That was the last time I let myself care about something helpless. Until you. He set the photograph down, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly. You were supposed to be different. Stronger. Someone who couldn't be broken. So you tried to break me yourself? I tried to test you. To see if you were real or just another illusion. Dominic turned to face her fully, and Helena saw him without his armor for the first time. I needed to know if you would survive me. The admission hit her like a physical blow. All those months of cold treatment, of isolation and emotional distance, had been his twisted way of protecting her from himself. You're an idiot, she said softly. I know. Brilliant, damaged, impossible idiot who thinks love is something you can control or manipulate or test. I know that too. Helena reached up and touched his face, feeling him lean into her palm despite himself. What if I told you I don't want to leave anymore? I'd say you're making a mistake. What if I told you that somewhere between hating you and understanding you, I started falling for the man hiding behind all that ice? Dominic's eyes closed, as if her words caused him physical pain. I'd say, you deserve better than a man who bought your love with lies. You didn't buy my love, Dominic. Can't purchase what someone gives freely. Emma stepped closer until her forehead almost touched his. But you did earn my attention, my curiosity, my respect for the way you've fought so hard to protect yourself from a world that hurt you. Helena? Her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. I'm not that helpless kitten you couldn't save, she whispered. I'm not your mother, broken by love. I'm strong enough to choose you, knowing exactly who you are and what you've done. The last of his restraint crumbled. Dominic's arms came around her with desperate intensity, and when their lips met, it was like lightning striking the same place twice. 6 months of careful distance exploded into hunger and need, and a recognition that neither of them had been prepared for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Helena saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. Terrifying, beautiful hope. The divorce papers, he said against her hair. Can wait until morning. Helena pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. We have more important things to discuss, such as how we rebuild this marriage from the ground up. With honesty? This time, with choice. She smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. And with love, if you're brave enough to let yourself feel it. Outside, the storm began to pass, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming with possibility. 2 years later, Helena stood in the same office where everything had changed. But now family photos lined the shelves where cold awards used to sit. The morning sun streamed through windows that Dominic had replaced with ones that opened, letting in air and light and the sounds of life beyond their walls. Mrs. Marquez. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your husband is here for lunch." Helena smiled at the formal announcement. Even after all this time, the staff couldn't quite adjust to how different their employer had become. The man who used to schedule affection like business meetings now showed up with surprise picnics and impromptu weekend getaways. Dominic appeared in the doorway carrying takeout containers and wearing the expression that never failed to make her heart skip. Love mixed with wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe she had chosen to stay. "How's the foundation coming along?" he asked, settling the food on her desk and stealing a quick kiss. "3 more families have their debt forgiven as of this morning," Helena replied, watching his face light up with pride. The Vasconcelos Foundation, funded entirely by Dominic's wealth and managed by Helena's heart, had become their shared redemption. They couldn't undo the manipulation that brought them together, but they could ensure no other family would be destroyed the way hers had been. "Good." Dominic pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I got the final papers from my lawyer today." Helena's breath caught. They had been working for months to legally transfer half of Dominic's assets to her name, ensuring she could never again be trapped by financial dependence. It was his way of proving that her choice to stay was exactly that, a choice. "And," she prompted, "and you're now one of the wealthiest women in the city." His voice held quiet satisfaction. "Free to leave whenever you want." Helena turned in his arms, studying the face that had once seemed so cold and unreadable. Now she could see every emotion that crossed his features, from the lingering fear that she might actually leave to the deeper certainty that she wouldn't. "Still trying to test me?" she teased. "Always." But his smile was soft now, vulnerable in a way that would have been impossible 2 years ago. "Though I think I'm finally learning to trust the results." Smart man. Helena kissed him properly, tasting coffee and contentment and the promise of all their tomorrows. "'Cause I'm not going anywhere. Even though I manipulated you, even though I trapped you." It was a conversation they'd had countless times, Dominic's guilt surfacing whenever life felt too good to be real. Helena had learned to meet it with patience instead of anger. "You gave me a choice," she said firmly. "Maybe not at first, but you gave me one when it mattered. You opened your hands and let me go, even when it was the last thing you wanted to do." "I love you," he said, the words still carrying a hint of amazement.
Yes.
As if he couldn't quite believe he was capable of the feeling. "I know." Helena traced the line of his jaw, marveling at how completely this man had undone himself for her. "I love you too. The you that existed before the walls, the you that's rebuilding himself piece by piece. And even the you that was broken enough to think love could be bought. I was wrong about that." "Yes, you were." Helena's smile was radiant. "Love can't be bought. But it can be earned, and it can be chosen, and it can grow even in the most impossible circumstances." Dominic captured her hands in his, bringing them to his lips. "What we have now, this isn't what I planned?" "No," Helena agreed, thinking of the cold arrangement that had brought them together and the fierce, complicated love that had grown from it. "It's so much better." Outside their window, the city hummed with life and possibility. Inside their office, 2 people who had found each other in the wreckage of manipulation and lies were building something real and lasting and beautiful. Helena had entered his world as a prisoner and discovered she was actually the key to his freedom. In teaching him how to love, she had learned her own strength. In choosing to stay, she had shown them both what choice really meant. The woman who had once felt trapped by his coldness had indeed warmed his heart. But in the end, it was her own heart that had caught fire, burning away everything that wasn't essential until only love remained. And deal like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.